presentation. If you want it bigger than that, double click on it and it will get bigger. There you go. Is everybody okay with that? All right, let me do a little introduction here. Our program, Lichens, a Treasure in Your Own Backyard, will be given by Tanner Barnhurst, who has been leading lichen and mushroom walks for nearly 10 years. Tanner published the Minnesota Lichen Guide in January of 2025, which is the first lichen guide for the entire state of Minnesota. Tanner has been with the Minnesota Mycological Society since 2021 and has been a Minnesota Master Naturalist since 2022. Learn all about the fascinating world of lichen, including biology, ecology, and how humans have used lichens for thousands of years. You will then learn how to describe different parts of lichens and see what you need to photograph to identify your lichen of interest. And then I have Tanner's website on the agenda, so you can do more, go to that whenever you care to. So go for it, Tanner.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you for the introduction, Terry. So, like Terry said, my name's Tanner Barnhurst, and I'm excited to be talking to you all today about lichens, and I'm hoping to put the fun in fundamentals for these lichens. And so I included a few pictures that I took all of these in either Minnesota or Wisconsin. And so on the right side, you see what are called reindeer lichen, which are in the Cladonia genus, and those can cover like entire hillsides. And so just to give you a bit of scale, these are all pine trees that are coming up between 6 and maybe 10 inches tall, bursting up through the big patches. And there's actually two different species of reindeer lichen here. Depending on how good your screen is, you can maybe tell the difference between the grayish ones and the greenish ones. And conveniently enough, that's what they're called. They're called gray reindeer lichen and green reindeer lichen. And on the lower left side, we have what are called pixie cups. Those are the ones that are cup-shaped, kind of goblet-shaped. And on the left side is an image shot through a 10x hand lens. So some of you may be familiar with that, but it's a magnifying lens, kind of like a jeweler's lens, that lets you see distinct features up close. And that's one of the ways that I look at lichens, and I encourage other people to do so. So just to give you an overview of what we're expecting to talk about today, I'm going to lay out the learning objectives. I'll talk about lichen biology and ecology. I'll talk about the fundamentals of identification. Then we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. And so just to get you started with some of the lichens, these are the top 10 most commonly observed lichens for y'all down in Goodhue County. And this information is pulled from iNaturalist. And so if you've seen one, odds are you've probably seen one of these. And not to get too out of order, but iNaturalist is a great tool to help you learn about lichens and to share the ones you find and to have other people help you identify them. So just to give you a taste of what you might be seeing out there. And so we did the intro, but I'll just talk a little bit more about myself. So once again, I am Tanner Barnhurst. I use he, they pronouns. I am the author of the Minnesota Lichen Guide. I've been educating for over 15 years. I've been doing mushroom and lichen walks for nearly 10. And I have a technical background that's kind of aligned with this. I have a bachelor's degree in microbiology and a master's degree in environmental engineering. And my lichen clout is that I have 10,000 lichen IDs on iNaturalist. So I spent a lot of time looking at lichens and clicking buttons. So, and that's a big part of what drove me to be writing the book. And then on the right side is just a headshot of me. And in the bottom right is a Minneapolis community ed class I taught 2 years ago now, 2 or 3, and about the fundamentals of mushrooms. And then in the middle picture is me hosting a lichen class up at the Cloquet Forestry Center in Cloquet, Minnesota, which is an amazing space. And it's open to the public, and I encourage you all to check it out. All right, so what am I hoping you'll learn from me talking today? So we're going to learn lichen biology and ecology. The fundamentals of what a lichen is at its most basic, it's a fungus plus an algae that equals lichen. And they also hang out in extreme environments and the bases of chains, like food chains. Then after that, we'll talk a little bit about the fundamentals of identification. So what do you need to know when you're looking at these things? We'll talk about morphology, which is the shape or form, habitat, color, the reproductive structures, and the underside. And then once you know what you're looking for, I'll talk about the basics of photography. We'll learn what minimum focus distance is and how that impacts you and your camera. Talk a little bit about macro photography and posting to iNaturalist. So I'm sure we all have lots of photos on our phone, but what do you do with them? Where do they go? One of the good spots is iNaturalist. So let's get in. So I can't quite see everybody all at once, but if I click a different one, I can. So we'll do a little bit of audience participation. So if your camera on, I would appreciate a raise your hand when we go through this one if you identify with the question. So who learned about lichens in their school, if any? And then I'm going to flip through. We got one hand up, a couple of head shakes. So it looks like we only got one person. Nice work, Katie. And that's pretty common. Lichens are pretty skimmed over in the curriculum, and it doesn't surprise me at all that we don't learn much about them, which is why part of the reason you're here. So a little bit more practical. Who feels they can distinguish between lichens and a moss? We got one hand up, 2, 3. Not too bad. All right, a couple more so. That's where it really comes in handy in nature. I get asked a lot, what are you looking, or like, what's the moss you're looking at? As a neighbor, there's lichens growing in my alley in Minneapolis, and every now and then when I'm nice and patient, I'll take out my 10x lens and I'll ask you one of the mosses I'm checking out. So they are different, and I'll talk a little bit about how to see those differences. Has anyone identified a lichen down to the species level? And Laura, you can raise your hand. That's no shame there. You were with me on my previous lichen walk. No lichen identifiers, perfectly fine. After today, you'll be able to figure it out. So we can skip that probably last question then. Who can describe 3 different parts of a lichen? That's even more advanced. So, but we'll learn a little bit about each one of these. There we go. All right. So just to get us all on the same page of what we're looking at for lichen biology 101, at the crux of the matter, fungus plus algae equals a lichen. And that's what I'm showing in both of these pictures over here. So this is a cross section of the lichen. So if you're really patient, had a really steady hand, you could slice it open, and this is what you'd see just inside of that on both images. So the gray or like kind of beige threads, that's all fungus, like all mushroom mycelium stuff, interweaving and creating structure. And it also holds the algae and keeps it safe. So, and then why are they doing this? The algae are creating energy and sugars from the sun, photosynthesis. And the fungus provides structure and a safe place for the algae to live and make their energy. And so that's how they kind of support each other. And that those photosynthetic products go from the algae to the fungus to keep it happy and fed too. And as a quick note, algae aren't plants. They don't have special plant parts, but they do photosynthesis. So they're related, but not true plants. And then the science word that we describe this relationship with is mutualistic symbiosis. So mutualistic means they both benefit. Symbiosis is how they interact. And so you can see in this microscope image on the lower left, all the little green bundles, those are your algae cells hanging out just at the top, but with a protective layer on top to keep them a little bit safe. And I'm going to pause after each section for questions. But feel free to ask them as we get there. So next step, lichen biology 102. So we might have Latin names, or I have Latin names for the lichens that I'm looking at. I think Punctelia boleana was the most common one for Goodhue County. That's the eastern speckled shield. But when we say those Latin names, we're referring just to the fungus part. The algae doesn't even get second billing or anything. They don't get any names or notoriety. And so an interesting thing about their biology is the fungus and algae can live alone, but they would look very different. And so that's part of the ways that they become a lichen is that they look different. And then once you get down into it, there are other organisms that live on and even within the lichens themselves. And that includes yeasts, bacteria, and tardigrades, among other things. So little water bears that squish and squiggle around, if you've ever heard of those. They can survive going into space, so they're kind of cool. And so when we break apart these algae, at least from like a theoretical standpoint, you would have just the fungus. This is a common brown cup fungus. So that's just fungus right there. And in the lower middle is cyanobacteria. This one's called a nostoc or a star jelly. To be honest, they totally look like a big sheet of boogers that are nice and wet and flat on the ground. And that's only cyanobacteria. So that's like blue-green algae or blue-green bacteria. And then you've probably all seen green algae too. You just might not have recognized it. So often you'll see it as a thin sheen or thin color on a piece of wood, especially near docks or any consistently wet environment. But when they come together, then they make these cool lichens. All right, so that's kind of how the nuts and bolts of the lichens work. But how do they interact with their greater environment is another really cool way that I like to consider them. So one thing to keep in mind is lichens are involved in both the carbon, water, and nitrogen cycles of our planet. And that's one of the ways that they are existing in their environment, one of the big ways that we classify them. And so they are involved in the carbon cycles because they do photosynthesis and they convert CO2 into like physical structures out of the gas in the air. And through that, they create and maintain soil, which you can kind of see in this right side image. Let's see. So lichens can, some lichens, the ones that use cyanobacteria, can pull nitrogen out of the air and then fix it so they can fix that nitrogen into their own body, kind of like certain legumes do with their little bacterial root nodules at the base. Um, and so that's how they're participating in global cycles. And then the really cool thing is that lichens are often the first step in succession, which you can kind of see over here. So I took this picture a couple years back when I was canoeing in the Boundary Waters. This is a huge granite boulder. As the gardeners, as y'all gardeners know, you can't be growing anything on bare rock. And so what the lichens do is that at first to come in there, they make in their little nooks and crannies, and then they make it a more easy environment for other organisms to come in, like mosses, especially. Mosses will come right in after the lichens, and then the mosses will reproduce and grow and do their thing. And then after that, as you can see on this image, grasses will often be the third organism to come in. Those grasses come in, they make roots, they're doing their own nitrogen fixing, they're making soil. And then after you get those grasses coming in, then you can see this big vascular woody plants come in, like this cedar tree. And that cedar tree couldn't have been there unless all those other organisms had come along in the way and helped to build up that soil and to build a happy spot for that tree to grow. Let's see. And so that's how one role that they play in ecology and succession. The other one is that a lot of animals just eat the lichens. A lot of insects, slugs, reindeer or caribou, squirrels, and other animals will all just go ahead and munch along all of those lichens. And then some of the ways that humans use lichens, or a fact about lichens is that they're sensitive to pollution in the air. So you'll see different lichens in an urban environment versus way out in the middle of nature. And that's because they're sensitive to the pollutants, like acid rain type stuff, or exhaust from cars. And so because they are sensitive to pollution, they can be used to monitor air quality and heavy metals. There's a professor at the University of Minnesota, Daniel Stanton, who is using lichens to monitor air quality. And so humans have been using lichens for thousands of years. Most commonly, they're consumed as food, spices, and medicine, especially in those listed countries, China, Northern Europe, and India. They've also been eaten by the Native American peoples in US and Minnesota, but primarily as starvation food. So in the upper right is a Chinese dish of fried lichens in a spicy chili oil with green onions. I bet that would have an interesting texture, kind of fun. I'd like to try that sometime. Another common use that I hear about frequently is lichens are used for dye making. So in the lower right, those are lichens made from, I think those are from the like rock disc lichen or tree saucer lichen way up in northern Scotland. But I assume many of us are familiar with Scottish tartan pattern and those unique colors. Those are all originally from lichen dyes prior to the invention of synthetic dyes. If you've ever heard of a litmus test for measuring pH, that was also originally made out of lichens. And cudbear is the common-ish word that they use for dyes in the lower right. That's how they describe that. Additionally, some lichens are poisonous. Vulpecida is a genus of lichens. They have this bright yellow-green color, and they've been used as poison for livestock control for at least a few thousand, I think at least since the year 1000 in Scotland and other areas. They've also been used for embalming in Egypt. If you remember those bushy lichens we saw on the very first page, the reindeer lichen, they would actually import those lichens to Egypt and use them to prepare mummies because they were antibacterial, they retain moisture really well, and they had good structure. So that's all to say that lichens have been used for documented ways for the last over 3,000 years in many different forms. So I'll pause here, and I'm happy to answer any questions relating to biology and ecology before we transition to start talking about how we look at lichens and how we begin to identify them. I saw there's like one thing in the chat, but I can't pull it up now. There we go.
Go ahead, Katie.
Well, my question is this, and it's a question of clarification. You talked about different species of lichens, but they're not a species. They're algae and a fungus. So do we call them a species, or do they have kind of their own hybrid classification system?
Yeah, so with lichens, you run into philosophy really quickly as compared to most biology things. And so, yes, they are made up of more than one organism within them, but we do use like the Latin naming system, genus species, as we refer to a single kind of lichen. When we talk about them. So for example, on the screen right now is called the common powder horn lichen. Those are all the ones that stick up and then curl over a little bit. Those are also in the Cladonia genus, and they're Coniophea. So I think it's like green cone in Latin. So yeah, they've got algae, they've got fungus in there. But to make lichens fit with everything else, you use the species naming structure.
Okay.
Great question though.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I'm a fiber artist, and I hear a lot of people talking about the dyeing properties of lichen, and I've done just a very small amount of research, but it appears that you need a lot of it, and there must be some kind of regulation about collecting it and
Yeah.
for use in that way. And so could you talk about that a little bit, about collecting and if you know anything more about how you actually would use it for dyeing?
For sure. So lichen dye, the first topic that comes up with lichen dyeing is sustainable harvest. Lichens grow slow. That's the only way to look at it. They can take years to get to that big bushy stage that I showed on the first one. And if you look at, these are tiny lichens. For scale, there's a red pine needle cluster in the middle, like the middle lower portion. So these are all small, smaller than my pinky finger. So what that means is for ethical or sustainable harvest, one of the best ways to do it is looking for what's called windfall or groundfall lichens. So often lichens will grow on rock surfaces, they'll grow up in trees, and it's not really great to be climbing a ladder or to be scraping off all those lichens on the rocks. But with time, they will get blown off through wind or rain events, and then those can be collected. That's what I did about a month ago. I was at a big lichen workshop out in Albany, New York. One of the lichens that's prized for dyeing is called rock tripe, Umbilicaria mammulata. And so I went through and I picked through the leaf litter, and I found the good looking pieces that were all gonna rot or go bad within the next year, or probably within the next month or two after they got rain and snow. They would start to become soil. So what that comes down to is talking to someone who is either responsible for land or who owns the land, getting access to that. And then my suggestion is to collect windfall or groundfall lichens. But lichen dyeing can be its whole own class. But did that answer the basics of your question, Peg?
Yeah, it's, I mean, we ended up feeling like we were really overwhelmed
Yeah, absolutely.
and didn't think that it was like going out and getting yarrow, for instance.
No, very different. Yeah, very different than yarrow, which grows
Yeah.
almost everywhere.
Yeah.
What kind of volume are we talking that
It's
you would need to do some dyeing?
usually it's a
Like,
1-to-1 ratio for lichen dye, like the lichen material to the fabric or the textile that you are dyeing. That is what I'm most familiar with. So like 8 ounces of lichens for 8 ounces of like wool.
and
Hey,
that's,
we've got a cemetery. We could go nuts down here in the cemetery and get you what you need if it's the right
well,
variety.
I mean, there's so many. I mean, it's one of
There are a
those
lot.
things you
Right.
tap into it a little bit and it's like, oh my goodness. But that 1-to-1 ratio thing, uh,
So
8 ounces of lichen is a lot of lichen.
yeah, for me, it was 2-gallon Ziploc bags that were filled with the rock tripe, and that gave me 8 ounces
Yeah.
of lichens, which is enough to dye 8 ounces of wool, which doesn't get you very far. You need a
Not very
whole
far at
lot for
all.
a sweater like mine. Right? So
Yeah, you're not going to make a sweater out of that.
no, you'd have to have a lot of patience or access to a lot of land. So
Okay, thank you.
you're very welcome. Good question. All right.
One other question,
Sure,
when you'd
go ahead.
mentioned kind of the deterioration of the lichen, so it's blown off the rock or whatever,
Mhm.
and it starts to deteriorate. Is that a
Mhm.
pretty quick process if there is moisture or whatever involved with it? So do they break down quickly?
I wouldn't say that they break down like a little bit slower than leaves, I would say. I have
Oh.
to put a scale on it. So the maple leaves that I was picking them out from under were also still fine, but I think they would probably decompose through like the winter season.
Okay.
So yeah, good question.
Thank you.
All right. Keep us moving along. So when we're talking about looking at lichens, there's 6 major buckets, and I'll have the PowerPoint slide for each one of these buckets that I use to look at lichens with. And so the first big way that I look at them is called morphology, and that's the study of forms. And so up here I have the Latin names, foliose, fruticose, and crustose, which are hard to remember. So of everybody you can go with, we have leafy, bushy, and crusty. And that's the same order as what's on the page. So foliose is leafy, fruticose is bushy, and crustose is crusty. So foliose is like foliage, like leaves. Fruticose sounds like a fruit, a fruiting body. So they make a thing like other plants and fruits do. And crustose is crusty. So if you can't remember a single vocab word or concept from here, I would ask that you can remember leafy, bushy, and crusty, because that'll get you the farthest for starting to identify your lichens. And that's how all the major lichen identification books are organized, by using this different shape or form. So leafy, bushy, crusty. And so then after that is the habitat or the substrate where the lichen is growing. And this can be rocks, trees, or soil most commonly. And some lichens can also, they can show up in different types of habitats or different substrates. And then in the human environment, now we have metal. And so lichens will grow on metal. Let's see. And so that's habitat and substrate. And then once you kind of got like the big picture of those morphology and the habitat, then you start to look at structures. What is the lichen like doing, basically? So almost all lichens will have a body or a thallus. That's like their main lichen component. And that's just that's like our body. It's not used for reproduction. It's how they get nutrients and how they get bigger until they're ready to start reproducing. And so those reproductive structures are called apothecia. They look like little cups. And soredia, they're like grainy patches or grainy bits. So if you can look at the body and the reproductive structures, that would be very helpful in understanding what you're looking at. And then after that is the color. So what does it look like? What is the thallus color? What do the reproductive structures look like? What is their colors? And then we have the underside. For some of the lichens, it's very important to know what's going on underneath them. Maybe like that. They make little rootlets called rhizines. Some have veins, some have certain habits, some curling up or down. And then the last big bucket is anything else unique or odd. It looks weird. Because at a certain point, most of you will not be remembering all the vocab words or the special things to look at. But if you can think of this part looks weird or this is different as part of the lichen, take a picture or take a note of it, and then that will really be helpful. Okay. So I have examples of the three major morphology or forms on here. So number one is foliose. It's leafy, like foliage. They like sit on top of what they're growing on. Number two is crustose. So they're growing right into the thing that they're growing on. In this instance, this is a brown rim lichen, and that grows right onto the bark. You can't separate it from what it's growing on. And then fruticose, so that bushy one, those are bushy. They have three-dimensionality to them. They grow up and off of the thing they're looking at, and they don't have a clear top or bottom. Whereas the foliose one does. It has a different appearance on the bottom. So, lichen morphology. And then, so where they're growing, are they growing on rocks? Are they by the water? Are they inland? That can all be helpful. Number two, the trees, they can grow on tree bark as well as bare wood. And the third bucket is soil. So this can be sand or mossy logs or mossy rocks or brown loamy soil. Those different habitats will be informative of what's growing there versus like sand versus loamy soil. And then metal, so railings, fences, buildings, and more. Usually it's either lichens that normally grow on trees or on rocks that'll grow on metal. One of my favorite spots near me is the Lakewood Cemetery iron gate that runs all around it. That's where number 4 is from. So there's a whole bunch of lichens on there. So substrate, where they're growing, important to know. So then getting a little bit more advanced, we're going to talk about the apothecia. So these are the cups. I got examples on the left side. So this is probably a kind of button lichen. They make little cups that pop out. They got a little rim. Sometimes it's the same color as the body. Sometimes it's different. And if you look at number 1 on the orange one, you can see it's got cute little orange cups on it. And then Ceridia, they're the grainy patches that we see on this image at the edge. They look fuzzy, grainy, gritty, so they have a distinct appearance from the rest of the lichen. And just as a note, the apothecia are for sexual reproduction. The fungal spores come out of there and they go and float around and drift on the wind. Whereas the Ceridia they're a packet, usually a fungal spore wrapped around, I'm sorry. It's algae wrapped in hyphae, the fungal hyphae. So it's like a little bundle of everything you need to make a new lichen. Like it's broken off, floats around on the wind until it finds a new spot and then keeps going. And those are kind of like clones. They're asexual reproduction. So one of the reasons I enjoy lichens is they come in such a beautiful array of colors. Noting the difference between the body and the reproductive structure can be helpful. So in the upper middle, we have a light green body and then a yellow reproductive structure. And so they come in all kinds of beautiful colors. We got greenish colors, we got orange, white, teal, red. Sometimes the reproductive structures are different. The apothecia, like on the upper right, is what's called a rock posy. So they grow the cute little orange cups, and then the body is that teal color. So recognizing those differences is important. One of the most commonly identified lichens or seen lichens in Minnesota is the lower left one, the British soldier lichens. They got the little red fleshy caps on top of little green spindles. So that's a good one to keep an eye out for since they're pretty noticeable. Yeah. And then the underside. So in the upper right, we see that white bottom of a foliose lichen, a leafy lichen. And that white bottom has black tips growing out of it. Those are the rhizines, number 1. there. So the Latin is a rootlet or little root. And those are found on the underside of only foliose lichens. And some lichens develop what looks like vein-like structures. This is a lobaria. This is a lung lichen, number 2. And they just look really interesting. And that's can be an important way of classifying or helping you know what lichen you're looking at. And then number 3, this is a hooded tube lichen in the Hypogymnia genus. You can see that the edges kind of curl out almost like a hood on some of those, which has the grainy Ceridia patches on them. And these ones also grow hollow. So if you look on the left side of the image, you can see a little hollow tube. So some of the things that you'll see when you start looking at the bottom of the lichens. And so color and rhizines and veins can all be important in identifying your lichen. And then you have the 6th bucket. The 6th and final bucket is everything else on your lichen. So one good feature that's helpful to recognize, they're called pseudosepala. I just call them little white dots. Some of the lichens have little white dots on them, and that helps you determine what genus the lichens are in. For the shield lichens in the Parmeliaceae family. There's a whole lot of shield lichens. They're like the big leafy kind that are easy to see with your naked eyeball. And the pseudocephala little white dots are helpful for separating those out. And then on this middle image, some lichens can have a crackled cell appearance. So they don't grow as a single continuous center or with lobes. They're all kind of crackled up. And some lichens have different colored edges, which you can see the edges are more of a black color, whereas the center is more of a yellow-green on those crackled cells. So you don't have to know what you're looking at. You can just say, this looks different. This is odd. And take a picture or take a note of it, and that'll help you know what you're looking at. So we just covered these 6 different buckets. Morphology, the study of forms. Is it leafy, bushy, or crusty? Where is it going? Rocks, trees, or soil, or metal? What are its reproductive structures? The apothecia or the Ceridia? Or is it just a body, the thallus? And what are the colors of each of those independent bits, as well as the underside, looking at rhizines and curling up or down and underside color, and anything else unique or odd. And I guess one thing I'll pause here is lichens like human, other like plants, they have to grow their non-reproductive part before they begin fruiting. So some lichens will be too young to identify them since they haven't made their reproductive structures yet. Just like plant identification is harder without flowers or fruits or things like that. Oh, I could put these slides out. We can do a practice one. How about that? So we're looking at this lichen on the right side. And so this will be a structured approach to the structured application of what we just learned. So when we look at this, does anyone know what the morphology is? Is it leafy, bushy, or does it look more crusty? And you're welcome to just unmute and chime in, or type it in the chat is also fine. If you're feeling bold, Laura, you might know, but no pressure.
Is it crusty?
I can see why you might say crusty. So crusty and leafy are like the 2 trickiest ones to learn the differences. So this one is not crusty. This one is leafy. It is sitting on top. And so it completely blocks out the thing that it's growing on. So since it's sitting on top of the thing it's growing on, this one means it's leafy. And this also shows it's hard to identify lichens in pictures. It's different where if we're all in the same room, you can poke and prod at it and like move it around a little bit. So this one is a leafy lichen. This is a foliose lichen. And habitat is hard. This is a zoom in of a pine tree. I think this is a red pine. I wouldn't expect anybody to know that based on the bark though. And so for structures, maybe what do we see when we look at it? I see a lot of body, a lot of light yellow-green body spreading out. And then there's also lots of little bumpy bits on different parts of those ridges. So those are the structures that I see, a body and bumpy bits. And then the underside or the color, it's a yellow-green-ish one, I would say. And underside, we can't really see that. And then anything else odd or unique, I'm not really seeing too much else going on here. So like
Is it
I just,
actually two pieces? You know, is it anything odd and unique? There's like a smaller right section to it and a larger left. Is that two different lichen bodies growing?
I think that's a fair thing to be aware of. Sometimes lichens can grow together. In this instance, I believe they are the same lichen species. What I would guess happened is this lichen landed on here, started to grow, and then the crack of the bark spread open and
Oh.
created that fissure that we see.
Sure.
The hardest time that people have with lichen identification is when they're trying to identify one they have in their hand, and then it turns out it's two different lichen species that are all smooshed up against each other. So it's a great question to ask and be wondering about as you look at it. So yeah, like I talked about, we're thinking this is folio since it's sitting on top of the tree bark. There's a conifer, it's got a body and small bumpy bits, those ceridia, all light green or yellow green, and then no underside is pictured here. So this is the most common lichen identified in Minnesota and pretty much all of the eastern United States. This is called a common green shield. This is Flavoparmelia caparata. And this is a pretty hard to, I guess there's no really scale on here, but this is a pretty mature one since it has all those reproductive structures. We'll do this one as well. So these are the same. These are the two same species. They look a little bit different, but does anyone feel like they could say what the morphology is? Is this leafy, bushy, or crusty?
But bushy.
Bushy, exactly. This one is bushy because it is growing up and off of the thing that is growing on, and it's got three-dimensionality to it. Habitat, a little bit tough to see, but this is on some old wood. For structures, we see the main body, which is what all the branches are. And then when we look close at the image on the right, there's lots of little bumpy bits that we don't see on the growth on the left side, the upper image. So those little bumpy bits are its reproductive structures, the ceridia. Color, this one's the same kind of light yellow green color. And underside, there is no underside. So since this is a bushy one, they don't have a different top and bottom. So no underside. Anything else odd or unique? We can see some of the lichens in the background. So it's growing with some other guys. So that could be something to be aware of. So yes, this one is bushy or three-dimensional. It's fruticose. It's growing on wood in a weathered open field, which only I know that since I collected it. Structures, it's got the body and small bumpy bits. It's all light green. There's no difference to the underside. Anything else odd or unique? Yeah, if we're getting farther into it, we could describe how the branches look. There's like three main bushy lichens in Minnesota. And this one has Y-shaped branching. So it's got lots of branching as compared to there's one that has a central cord and 90-degree branching. So using angles or letters or shapes like that, that can be helpful too. So this is what's called a boreal oak moss. You're here in the lichen presentation. Why am I showing you oak moss? So the hang up with lichen common names, they don't always make sense and they're not always very true. So even though this is an oak moss, I have never seen it growing on oak, and it is not a moss, it is a lichen. So what can you do? That's life in the big world of biology. So that's one of the reasons that I learn and use the Latin names, is because they can have more repeatable or understandable structure. This is Avernia mesomorpha. This is the one of the most common bushy lichen observed in Minnesota. All right, last one. So we've done leafy and bushy. What does anyone think of this last one is?
Crusty.
Crusty, there you go. Sometimes the way the teachers teach can help you learn. So this is a crusty guy. The habitat's a little bit easier to tell. Does anyone have a guess for what this one is? Between rock, tree, and soil?
Tree.
tree, exactly. Structures. So this one doesn't have the same structures that we've seen before. It doesn't have the little cups. It doesn't have, might look a little bumpy, but it's got the little black wiggles. So those little black wiggle swiggle things, those are actually its reproductive structures. They have like a fancy different word that you don't need to remember. It's called lorella. But then the color, is anyone feeling brave enough to say what colors that this one looks like to them?
Ah,
No trick question.
Gray?
Gray. Yep, absolutely. A gray or a white with the black little raised structures. Underside, this one doesn't have an underside since it's crusty. And anything else odd or unique? I would say those little black wiggles are pretty unique to me.
yeah, I got a question.
Sure,
You
go
said
ahead.
that those are the reproductive structures, the little black flecks that we see.
Mhm.
Does the algae and the fungus, obviously they got different reproduction methods, but do they
do.
somehow reproduce together in the case of lichens?
So yeah, so sometimes the little bumpy bits, those ones have algae and lichen in them. They're more
Okay.
like clones than sexual reproduction, though. So they're the same genetic
Ah,
material.
okay, got it.
And you couldn't tell this by looking at it, but I'm telling you as a lichen biologist, the little black squiggles are where the fungal reproduction occurs. So fungi are doing sexual reproduction. They're doing meiosis and they're scrambling up their genetics and they're letting out their spore structures that have different genetic makeup than the host lichen. So
But algae, not so much.
to my understanding, I haven't seen the algae doing sexual reproduction in the lichens. I haven't heard about that from anyone.
Okay.
So from my best understanding is that they are out there just doing clonal reproduction, at least in lichens. I don't know if that's different elsewhere.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. So this is a crusty guy. This one's smooth onto the bark. There's not a way for you to get a finger underneath it. So crustose or crusty habitat. This one's on tree bark. This is some kind of hardwood. The structures, we see the white or gray body and those raised black lines, and that covers color as well. Excuse me. And yeah, that's about it for how we look at this one. So this one's called the common script lichen or the graffiti lichen, called Graphis scripta. And I think this is the most commonly observed crusty lichen in all of Minnesota. So, and this is another graffiti lichen. And so it's not always easy or very often easy to begin applying these different terms and knowing what you're looking at, but with repetition and looking at more and more lichens, you'll start to see the patterns that emerge and ways to describe them. I've got a couple more slides on photography, but I'm happy to pause here. I know we're getting close to the question and answer time.
How many times magnified would this picture be approximately?
This one's about 10 times magnification.
Okay.
So this is very reasonable to be able to see with a 10x hand loop or hand lens. And on the next slide, I have a special attachment on my phone that lets me take these photos directly through my iPhone. I'll hop over there since we're asking about it. So I use the lens on the lower right, which is called the brand is Neewer, Neewer, and that gives you 10 times magnification. And I've got a special case that that lens screws right onto, and then it's like I can take photos like I'm looking through the hand lens. And I can actually do a little bit better than looking through the hand lens since my phone has up to 5 times magnification. So I can actually get close to 40 or 50 times magnification by looking at my lichen with the little attachment. Any other questions about identification or the exercise before I hop on to photography?
I have a question about your book. I'm assuming that these marvelous photos are in your book.
Many of them are correct.
So, Yeah. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I have used iNaturalist. I don't find it as easy to use as Plant ID,
That's
but
fair. Mhm.
it's so interesting looking at them. And I have one other question
Mhm.
about identifying them. I had thought, oh, I know what I'll do. I have this tree, this pine tree, actually several pine trees that have died in my yard, and there seems to be lichen all over the dead
Ooh,
branches.
sure.
So maybe I can harvest that lichen. Well,
Yes.
it was like, it was so skinny, and it was like, I'm gonna be here forever if I do this. But
Yeah.
do you know offhand what kind of lichen likes to grow on pine? Or is there, I mean,
Yeah.
is it tree specific, the type of tree, or is it just where the spores land or whatever?
So, yeah. So some lichens will absolutely have tree species preferences. From what I've seen, it's usually like the big buckets. Is it a smooth barked hardwood versus will have its like own group of lichens that like to grow on there. Whereas conifers, pine, spruce, and fir will have different lichens that like to grow on them. Sometimes it's different with the the cedar type trees. Um, so sometimes they can have strong preferences for the lichens that grow on each one of those types. And sometimes the lichens are not so picky and they'll hop around and grow on different ones. But yes, one of my favorite spots to harvest a whole lot of lichen all at once is a dead conifer tree. They will frequently um, become like the dead branches will become laden and like heavy with lichens. And my
Mhm.
understanding is that that is due to how the conifer trees are like designed to shed water. So my understanding, feel free to correct me, other plant people, is that the conifers are designed to like drip water down the branches and to help uh, deload snow and water that way. Whereas hardwoods are more designed to have the water run down the central trunk rather than going down and off the branches. And so, because conifers, they like to run the water down their branches, that runs it right into the lichens that like to live there. And then they have like a more happy time because they're getting more water and they can grow better. So that is one of the reasons that you will see occasionally a dead conifer out in a forest or fallen over, and it'll be like covered in lichens. Often Usnea lichens, the beard lichens, but also Parmelia, the shield lichens, and some other ones too.
Okay. So ethically, how does that work? If it's in my yard, then, but I don't want to rob it from nature either. But
Yeah,
is that ethical?
I would say that's ethical. When it comes to the ethics of how you manage your own land, I think you're perfectly fine to take as many lichens off of a dead tree as you are interested in. Um, as I would encourage you to find a use for them before denuding the tree of all of its lichens. Like Usnea, the beard lichens can be used in tea. Medicinally, I know there's herbalistic uses for that. You can also make them into dyes. Um, and I don't know as much about the other lichen species on the
Okay.
parmelias and such, but I personally think it's fine. It's kind of like at the end of the day, it's your land, it's your tree. And if you take all the lichens off of it after it's been hanging around dead for a few months, I think that's perfectly fine.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right.
Do lichens actually hurt trees that they are attached to?
They do not. It may be like some extremely rare or unique scenario, but 99 times out of 100, the lichen is just kind of hanging out. They're not making the tree sick, they're not really helping it in any way, but they're using it as a spot to hang out and get nutrients, energy from the sun, and be at their certain height off the ground to get them the right amount of water and moisture. So no, simple answer, lichens aren't hurting the trees. But like Peg was talking about, often we'll see dead trees covered in lichens. And then maybe the question is, did the lichens hurt the tree? But no, they're just taking advantage of that tree not having any more leaves, and they're using up all that extra, that habitable space. So that's a good question. All right, I'll move along. A couple more slides. All right, so we talked about this a little bit. Lichens are small. They're often small and they're hard to photograph. That's just the way it is. And so how we have to work around this is your camera phone and all cameras have something that's called a minimum focus distance. That's how close your subject to your camera can be before basically your phone goes cross-eyed. There's a certain, like when you hold your finger up to your nose, there's a certain point that you can no longer focus on it anymore and it goes blurry. That's the exact same thing with cameras. And so for most modern phones, this is about 4 to 6 inches away, which is about the span of my hand from bottom to top, or the size of like most of the standard iPhones nowadays. So you have to be that distance away before your phone will focus in like the 1x mode. And so some phones now have what's called a macro mode that lets you get closer than that 4 to 6 inches and take your photo. So that's on the model phones I have listed here, the iPhone 13 Pro and newer, and the Pixel 7 Pro and newer. And if you don't have one of these, maybe you got a different Android phone. If your camera can do ultra wide mode, 0.5x, that is the same as macro mode. And I got a little activity on the next slide that we can do to check that too. So I do recommend, if you're interested or even curious about lichens or mosses or any kind of phone photography, I do encourage people to check out the camera lenses, the macro camera lenses. You can get really cheap ones. I don't really recommend the really cheap ones, the less than $10 ones. They don't really work so great. The screw-on lenses are convenient, but can be expensive. They retail for $50. I know right now they have a 25% off sale. So that brings it down to what, $35 or so, which I'm biased, but I've taken literally over 2,000, or I think it's been like 5,000 photos over the last couple of years, all through this lens. Especially if you have an iPhone or something that has a compatible case on it, you're like cruising. You can take pictures of plants up close, mosses, anything you're curious about. You can see like how they do print details on like magazines, how it's like, my mom was in the graphic design and printmaking industry for a long time, so that's how she related to it. But so you can see anything up close, which is kind of fun. But I'm biased. I'm a microbiologist and a camera photography nerd. So yeah. Okay, so how do you know if you can take macro photos or not? So if you'd like to, you can take out your phone and open your camera app, and we can decide right here and right now whether or not you can do macro photos with your camera. So the design for cameras is relatively standardized now. So what numbers do you see at the bottom? Does it have a 0.5, 1, 2, or 3? And so those are all the default lenses or like focal lengths that you can have. So if you hit 0.5, you're going to be in macro mode. Or if you're in an iPhone, this little flower icon will pop up when you're in macro mode. And so I'll let people do that for a minute or two. And so the short answer is, if you don't have a macro mode, you don't have 0.5, but you do have the 1, 2, or 3 on there, you're just going to have to get far enough away and then probably zoom in from one of those modes. And then that would be the best way to get an up-close photo of a lichen that you're interested in. And I'm happy to, I know we're getting close to time, but I'm happy to stick around after and answer questions as well. And happy to do a little bit of phone troubleshooting too with people. Did anybody find out an answer to whether or not they got macro mode or learn something new about your camera maybe? Nice, got a hand up from Nancy. There we go. And Peg, Mary. Yep. All right, great. Yeah, we're learning. Fantastic. Just a couple more slides. So let's say you found a cool lichen while you're out on a nature walk, or maybe even in your own backyard, and you're trying to figure out what it is. This is what I would say is the gold standard for getting a good photo and a good documentation for your lichen. Oops. So number one, you want a picture of the whole lichen filling the frame of your camera, filling the frame of your camera. So it should fill it all up, and it should be in the plane of focus. So cameras can't have everything in focus. They usually end up having like what's about a saucer shape, kind of like your eyeball lens shape in focus. So you want to make sure you're parallel to the thing so that your camera and your subject are all in the same plane. They're parallel. That'll get the most of your subject in focus. And so that's the first step. And then after that, you want to take a close-up picture of reproductive structures. So you probably don't know that the many-fruited dog pelt lichen, the little red saddle-shaped things, are its reproductive structures, but you might recognize that that's a weird or an odd or unique thing that's different from the rest of it. And you can take a picture of those. So you take a picture of those reproductive structures and then a photo of the underside, which is very important for this genus of lichens, the Peltigera. So you can see the little veins and little rootlets on it, the rhizines, and their color and habit will tell us more about it. And then if you're really going for the gold, a picture of the substrate. So either tree species or rock or soil or moss, that'll help people identify what you're looking at. And then I recommend that you post it to iNaturalist. That's the best way to get a response for what you're looking at. And lucky enough, there's something called the Minnesota Lichen Map. So since lichens are weird, I guess I didn't really talk about this in their biology, but lichens are not a single evolutionary event from which all other lichens occurred. Things become lichens. Fungus choose to do lichen stuff. They choose to become lichenized, or choice might be a strong word, but there are multiple instances of lichens arising within the biological record. So it's hard, it doesn't quite work. Like you can't just type in like flowering plants and iNaturalist and every plant that's ever developed a flower pops up. Lichens, there's like weird different bits and pieces of the biological tree. And so some smart enterprising folks have come up with a Minnesota lichen map. They did all the hard work of finding out where all the lichens are for you. And you can upload your photos and make your observation within that lichen map. And so in addition to helping you figure out what you're looking at, those pictures can help scientists understand a greater picture of lichens around the world, or around Minnesota at the very least. And it's perfectly fine if you have no clue what your lichen is. My suggestion is to just start typing in common lichens, and then it has this automatic recommendation of class Lichanoromycetes. And then you pick that, and then that'll put it in the lichen map, and then someone like me can help identify it for you. And then if you're not familiar with iNaturalist, there's the grade that you're looking for. It becomes good to use for scientists when two different people provide an identification for the thing you're looking at. And then it's research grade. And if you take a picture of the QR code on the screen right now, that'll take you to the lichen map. So we covered a lot of topics, but this is what I was hoping for y'all to take away as the learning objectives. You're figuring out what lichens are made of, what makes up a lichen, fungus plus algae, their ecology, where they hang out in the environment. They work in extreme environments, challenging environments, and they work in the basis of food chains. The fundamentals of identification, we're looking for morphology, leafy, bushy, or crusty, their habitat, color, reproductive structures, and the bottom. And the basics of photography for how we try to take photos of these guys. And then it wouldn't be a good presentation if I didn't do a little bit of a plug for myself. So I am indeed Tanner Barnhart. This is the Minnesota Lichen Guide that I wrote. And you don't even have to pay me any money to look at this thing. If you take a picture of the QR code in the lower left, that'll take you to the Google Drive folder where you can download the Minnesota Lichen Guide for free. So go ahead and do that if you like, or if you'd like to support me and the work that I did, you can also purchase the Minnesota Lichen Guide at the U of M bookstore. It's retails for $15 and they have a whole bunch of taxes and shipping and other stuff like that. But if you're just curious and you want to take a peek, I would go ahead and follow that QR code. Or if you even Google Tanner lichens or Tanner fungus, that takes you to my website, where you can also find links to the book for free.
Wow.
Thank
That's amazing, Tanner.
you. The Minnesota Lichen Guide started out as a volunteer project for the Minnesota Master Naturalist group, and so that's why I make it a point to provide for free, since I worked on it for free. So.
Hmm.
And the one thing I didn't mention is that lichens look really cool underneath ultraviolet light. So here's just a handful of ultraviolet light or a black light. So these are just a handful of images I've taken within the last year or so that show the lichens look really cool under these different colors.
Wow.
And if you'd like to contact me, my name is Tanner Barnharst. You can email me at tanner.barnharst@gmail. I also have an email set up called the Midwest Mycologist for questions on the written guide. And you can even tag me on iNaturalist at Tanner-lichens-shrooms, the #1 lichen identifier for Minnesota, with about 10,000 lichen IDs. And so I'm happy to take a peek. It might take me a little while to check out the thing, but if you tag me, I'll probably eventually check it out. And so I know we're just a couple minutes over time, but I'm happy to hang around and answer questions, answer more questions. I appreciate all your time and attention and everyone for showing up for the Zoom meeting, and listening to me talk about lichens. Thank you.
You.
Thank you.
No, it's very good. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I do have a question about, I think it was in the Star trip this past weekend. Saturdays, they do kind of a nature page kind of thing. And they were talking about the kind of hanging lichens, or it's almost veil-like or moss-like, like you see down south in a lot of the trees and whatnot. Is that from looking at your book and kind of thinking about that a little bit, is that like one of the beard lichens, or what type of lichen is that, and would we be able to see that in this area?
Ooh, yeah, so those would be the beard lichens in the Usnea genus, Usnea. I don't believe they will come up south of the cities, but I could be wrong. I know they're much more abundant in the northern forests, where sometimes they can get up to multiple feet long. I think the longest one I heard is like 6 foot long, the Methuselah beard. And some are shorter than that, but yes, they get quite large. I don't think they show up down in Goodhue County, but I could be wrong.
Could I have seen that up in like Grand Marais, North Shore area?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking. I have seen them, but
they would be all over the place up there. They like to
Okay.
hang and dangle from conifer trees up there.
yeah, great.
And that's the one that some herbalists will use, I think, for colds. It's like it got drying properties, so it can help you bust up your mucus, which I'm not sure how I'm coming through, but I'm also working on getting over a cold right now, so maybe I need some of that too. Other questions or comments from anyone else on the call? So I guess like one thing that usually comes up is people ask me, can you grow lichens at home? And the answer is no, unfortunately. There hasn't been, to my knowledge, and speaking with the lichen professor at the U of M, I haven't heard of anyone in like a home environment culturing lichens and keeping them to grow nice and happy like they would on even like the lower right image is like old cinder blocks that have just been sitting out in the middle of a field. They're just hard to keep the lichens happy. Yeah, so that's kind of what it comes down to. I think they've managed at the U of M to keep, I think like 30% of lichens alive from like a colonizing event. And they have like this special cloud forest or like contained environment that's like supposed to mimic the cloud forest of Central and South America. And I think after 6 months, like 7/10 of the lichens all died. So hard to keep them alive, even if you got a lot of them. funds and time. So any other questions? Great.
Well, thank you so much, Tanner. I learned so much. I think we all did, I'm sure.
Awesome.
We
I
really
appreciate that.
appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Yeah, thanks for all taking the time. I know lichens can be a bit overwhelming or there's a lot to learn. But at the end of the day, my recommendation is to just practice looking at them. You don't have to know all the names and terminology. Getting an appreciation and like seeing them in the environment is the first step to becoming more familiar, more intimate with them. So take photos, check them out, just be curious, and then everything else will come in time.
Well, thanks again, and we really appreciate it. Maybe next year we can
Yes.
take a live lichen tour.
Yeah, I would definitely be open to that. Feel free to send me an email and we can get something figured out.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Enjoy the
And
rest of your evening.
thank you. I will. You do the same.
Let's